Muy buenos días, bonjour, buongiorno, guten Tag, good afternoon, everyone. I see the room is filling up. We're nearly 100 participants now. So I would like to introduce our very first speaker today. That is Vivian Filippi from IFAD, who will set the scene with her opening remarks before it's back over to me, Matthias Geck, to give you an introduction of today's event. Please, over to you, Vivian.
Thank you, Matthias. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I'm truly honored to kick off this interesting webinar where we'll have the chance to discuss on how to advance the agroecological transition and, more importantly, to hear about project highlights from the partners who do actual work to transform agri-food systems on the ground. As we all know, agroecology has gained momentum and sustainable approaches are increasingly driven by the latest high-tech trends. This is the case of precision agriculture backed by GPS, drone sensors, and satellite imagery, but also big data analytics and artificial intelligence algorithms that analyze large data sets to provide insights into crop health, pest infestation, weather patterns, optimal management practices, and so on. And the transition program and in other initiatives, for example, the blockchain technology enhancing transparency and traceability in the food supply chain by recording and tracking on the origin, the production and distribution of agricultural products. But we also have advances in gene editing tools that enable to select traits such as yields, disease resistance, and nutritional content. So in the future, we will see more and more integrated smart farming systems combining all of these digital tools, sensor, the automation devices that will allow to have more and more informed decisions. But despite all this, there are still remarkable hindering factors to agroecology mainstreaming. Among the most recurrent barriers, we find policies that favor conventional agriculture over agroecological practices, like subsidies for chemical inputs, for example. And this is contextual to the lack of institutional support and extension services to provide guidance, training, and technical assistance. You'll see the limited market access or consumer willingness to pay a premium price for agroecological produced goods that at times discourage farmers from transitioning to sustainable practices. We also witness resistance to change from farmers, communities that are attached to conventional farming methods. And there is insufficient research, data, and information on the efficacy, scalability, and profitability of agroecological practices that lead to a certain uncertainty and skepticism by a number of actors. So in order to remove these roadblocks to promote the agroecological transition, luckily we can leverage on a number of catalytic factors. For example, promoting government policies, including subsidies that incentivize sustainable farming practices and promote research and education in agroecology, but also encouraging consumer preferences for organic, locally produced and sustainable grown food products. And we can also rely on public awareness campaigns, advocacy efforts, and social movements that promote the benefits of agroecology. And indeed, the transition program is tackling some of these challenges through some leverages. And just to name a few, I would like to emphasize the continued research and development of agroecological tools and technology that improve productivity, resilience, and environmental sustainability, but also partnerships and collaboration with many different stakeholders, including farmers, researchers, NGOs, but also the private sector and government agencies. And lastly, the program is counting on the promotion of educational initiatives to empower farmers and in some cases extensionists with knowledge and skills in agroecology to abandon conventional practices. So I'm really thrilled to hear what is coming out of the progress highlights from the project team. So back to you, Matthias.
Thank you very much, Vivian, for these wonderful and really inspirational opening remarks. So good afternoon, everyone, again, and welcome for the ones who have just joined. It's great to have so many familiar and some new names and people with us today. My name is Matthias Geck. I'm the coordinator of the Agroecology Transformative Partnership Platform, or TPP, and have the pleasure to lead one of the transitions projects on metrics. As Vivian said, the Transitions Programme, kindly funded by the European Commission and managed by IFAD, set out with the ambitious goal to accelerate agroecological transitions in a meaningful manner. And it aims to do so by addressing three key questions. that hold back agroecological transitions. One, people need to value and understand the multifunctionality of agriculture and also value this and measure this through more holistic metrics. And we will have the pleasure to hear from our wonderful partner, Statistics for Sustainable Development, represented by one of the key data engineers, Dave Mills, who will tell us about how the development and co-design of a database can really support diverse actors in measuring what matters to them. Subsequently, we have the great pleasure to have Violaine Lorenz with us from Solidaridad Latinoamericana, who will tell us how the Digital Tools Project, Inclusive Digital Tools in Brazil, is making great advances in making digital tools available to farmers and making it a key factor for scaling up agroecological transitions. And then we will have our final partner for today, who is Sébastien Balmis, Corporate Social Responsibility Focal Point, as well as Cocoa Program and Quality Manager at the French company Cauca, who focus on fair trade organic chocolate. And Sébastien will tell us a bit how the the private sector incentives and investments project of the Transitions Program aims to engage with farmers and the private sector and policymakers in Peru to scale up agroecological production of cocoa. Subsequently, the new scientific coordinator of the Agroecology TPP, Sandhya Kumar, will lead a panel discussion with the three partners and the PIs available for questions if needed, before we then turn to you as wonderful participants of today's event to engage with the speakers and the PIs, but also the manager from IFAD and the donor from the European Commission with some key questions. For this purpose, please make use of the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. You can post questions at any moment. Whenever possible, please try to address it directly to the person you would like that question to be answered. In the meantime, all of us as panelists will try to answer some of the questions in written before we get to the Q&A session. Then we will hear from the European Commission as the main donor of the Transitions Programme, and we have the pleasure to have Marion Michon from the Directorate General for International Partnerships from the Commission with us to give us a perspective from the donor side on what has been achieved so far and where future challenges might lay. Finally, it's a great pleasure to have the PI for the Digital Tools Project wrapping up the session. That is Lini Wallenberg from the University of Vermont and the Alliance of Bioversity International and CIAT. She will wrap up with some key findings, some recommendations, and some ideas for the way forward. Initially, our wonderful colleague, Jonathan Mockshell, also from the Alliance of Bioversity International and CIAT, who leads the Private Sector Incentives and Investments Project, was going to speak alongside Lini Wallenberg, but similar to me and to Marion Michon, Joe is not feeling too well today. So we're really looking forward to an exciting event and engaging with you. And without further ado, I would like to pass over the floor to our wonderful colleague, Dave Mills from Statistics for Sustainable Development to give us an insight into the metrics project of the Transitions Programme. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthias. And whilst I share my screen and begin the presentation, I'll introduce myself. My name is Dave Mills. I'm the lead data engineer at Statistics for Sustainable Development, and I'm leading the metrics database and library workstream for this metrics project. I'm going to give a quick update on our work over the past year and share our aims for the coming year. But first, a little bit about me and my team. Statistics for Sustainable Development, or Stats for SD, is a not-for-profit small group of statisticians, data engineers, and other experts. And our goal is to help like-minded groups push towards a sustainable future. We've worked with the TPP since it was set up in 2019. We're a member of the Agroecology Coalition, and we're bringing our expertise in handling and presenting data into this project by helping to build the metrics database and library. But we've really been involved in most parts of the project so far, which is great because I get to talk about the whole range of activities we've been doing. So briefly, what is our project actually aiming for? So our goal is to help people interested in measuring agricultural systems performance to measure what matters. Because we know that what we measure about a system informs how we view that system. So if we're going to encourage change, we need to change what we measure. And so, as it says, we want to help people measure what matters and take a holistic approach to measuring and therefore understanding these systems. Now, how do we do that? Our work is split into different work packages. First, we know there is a lot that we don't know. So throughout the project, we have a focus on stakeholder engagements. And we want to make sure that everything we do is actually relevant and useful to the people we're trying to support. So of course, we need to talk to everyone, or as many people as possible. We also know that there are so many existing tools and metrics, frameworks out there. So a key step in our project has been this collection, review, and curation of these existing metrics, both for our own understanding and so that we can help others to understand the landscape and find the tools that work for them. Speaking of which, we have the database and library work package, where we're taking the outputs from this review and organizing all of this rich data into a searchable database. And then we're going to provide a clear user-friendly interface for anyone to use the database, and we call this a library. Finally, something that has emerged over the course of the project is this clear need for a guide to all of this complexity. Now, this guide is not just another framework that we're going to add to the pile of existing frameworks, but rather it's something that aims to help people in choosing frameworks, tools, and metrics that match their goals and their context. So what have we achieved so far? 8,740 articles we have screened and reviewed. We've extracted the relevant metrics. We've pulled together key information to prepare for our database. We have reviewed 330 separate assessment tools that have been used and written about in the literature. And from all this, we have over 10,000 metrics in our draft database. And that's a big number, but it's a little bit inflated because we have some duplicate metrics, we have some work to do, but it's an indication of the scale of this project that we're working with. And this is, as far as we know, the most extensive review of these assessment tools that has ever been conducted, both in terms of the number of articles reviewed, but also the dimensions we're covering, the scales we're considering, and the geographic scope. We're not limiting ourselves because we want our outputs to be useful for as many people as possible. Also, through the stakeholder engagements, we have interviewed 73 key informants from across dozens of institutions. And of course, we have a new meta framework that we have developed and we have started to pilot. So we've learned a lot. And this year, we're putting this learning into practice. So I'll go through a few key learnings that we've found, and then how we're turning that into actions for this coming year. The first is an understanding of the key gaps that people find when they're trying to measure performance in agri-food systems. People have questions like, how do you find suitable proxies in specific domains, like social or environmental? And we know we should take a multidimensional approach, but what metrics can we use for things like health and nutrition, or other underdeveloped dimensions that we as an institution aren't so aware of? We also have identified key use cases. People measure performance for different reasons, and it's important to understand that in order to be able to help people choose what metrics they're going to use, how they're going to measure it. We've identified these use cases where individual projects might be looking to assess the performance of a project. There might be people looking to assess a portfolio of projects and understand the performance of that. And then there are people looking at the entire food system domains. And so we've identified these use cases so we can try and test our products with these different use cases to understand how they work and if they work for these different cases. And finally, this meta framework I've mentioned. This is actually one of the things that has emerged out of our work in this project. We were originally going to build a new framework for measuring performance and taking a holistic lens from it. But we realized that really wouldn't have been helpful. There are so many frameworks out there. People are using these frameworks and they're successfully using the frameworks that already exist. But the real challenges come from knowing where to start. How do you map? How do you go from your goal of understanding a system in a holistic way? How do you take that and go and understand the principles that you might use, the features and elements of the assessment system that you're building, all the way to actually developing an assessment and going and measuring the performance of the system? So we're writing something to help with that instead of just another framework. So all this brings us to our next steps. We have some initial focus points for the library interface. How can the tool that we are building help fill the gaps that have been identified? From these use cases, we have a structure to help form working groups of stakeholders to enable collaboration, not just between us and others, but between different stakeholders who do similar work, but maybe don't realize it. And we have a product to beta test. We have the meta framework. We will soon have the database and then the library to beta test with stakeholders. And so all of this comes back to us engaging more and more this year. So this year, mid-2024, we're going to have this open access interface for the database that we are currently organizing and refining. And by the end of 2024, we aim to have this library of performance metrics, a first version, ready, online, and publicly accessible. During this year, we will beta test this meta framework and library with stakeholders. And as I mentioned, we have these working groups that we want to really engage with to make sure that we're not just testing it with one use case. And we have further engagements planned to support partners across all the project countries. And just before I finish, I have one last slide, because I think this project is producing some very important outputs. But there are things that we want to do that's beyond this project. We have this meta framework, a guide to help users understand how to create an assessment process. We have this library of metrics and tools. But what if we could combine them? What if we could have one entrance where people can ask questions all the way from, I want metrics to measure soil health and soil-related climate services in a low-cost way, all the way up to, I want to develop an assessment of this agri-food system. And what if there was a combined product that could help with those questions? Now, this isn't something that we are going to be able to do in this project, but this isn't just one project and then we stop and we're done with agroecology. This is a step-by-step process, and we hope that by building our tools in a particular way, we can help with the next steps. Thank you very much. That's all from me, and I will pass back to Matthias to introduce the next speaker.
Thanks so much, Dave. Wonderful. Very, very interesting. Then without further ado, I would love to hand it over to Violaine Lawrence from Solidaridad Latinoamericana. Please, over to you, Violaine.
Thank you, Matthias. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. So my name is Violaine Lawrence. I am the Digital Solutions Manager for Solidaridad Latin America. Solidaridad is an international nonprofit with a 50-year track record fostering inclusive and sustainable value chains. And in the context of the Transitions Programme, we partnered with the Alliance to implement the Digital Tools project in Brazil with the objective to promote innovations related to digital tools to enhance inclusiveness and enable climate-informed agroecological transitions at scale, with a focus on livestock landscapes in the state of Pará. So next slide, please. I'm going to take you to Pará, in the heart of the legal Amazon in Brazil. So Pará is one of Brazil's major cattle hubs. And despite major efforts to reduce emissions from land use change over the last few years, Pará still records high rates of deforestation, mainly driven by the expansion of cattle raising and soy farming. In family farming, low livelihoods and the lack of quality technical assistance hinders productivity and also leads to increased pressure on the environment. So Solidaridad has been working in the south of Pará in 3 municipalities along the Trans-Amazonian Highway for over 10 years. And currently we work with a group of 1,200 families who produce cocoa and livestock as their main crop. The majority of landowners are men, but 50% of the group are women who are responsible for managing the land. Farmers in this group have different literacy levels. Many have not completed primary education. And in general, the producers tend to be influenced by the conventional vision of agriculture, which is promoted by the Brazilian agribusiness. Next slide, please. Few information around local production systems. So the average size of the farms is around 60 hectares. It can be up to 300 hectares and still be considered family farming in the context of the Amazon. On the graph on the screen, you can see the average distribution of land activities in the farm supported by Solidaridad. Significant portion of the land dedicated to pasture and approximately 3 to 4 hectares to cocoa, and the prevailing model is extensive livestock production. So the baseline situation was very distant from agroecological systems, but there is huge potential for transitioning to low carbon, climate resilient production practices. And the extensive size of farms allows for diversified production systems. And we also have favorable endoclimatic conditions, which enable more than 1 harvest per year. So our program focuses on implementing together with farmers a production model that combines cocoa agroforestry systems, so livestock and preservation of forest area, with the goal of boosting family income while reducing carbon emissions and deforestation. And we encourage the adoption of agroecological practices based on this holistic approach to farming system, considering the various productive activities and the interactions between them. Next slide. So to conclude setting the scene for this project, just a quick look at the conditions regarding the use of digital tools, which are actually quite favorable. Because mobile internet coverage in the region is relatively limited, but the majority of the farmers have a stable on-farm internet connection through satellite technology. All farmers have a smartphone and use WhatsApp. And there is also widespread use of social media, such as TikTok and Quai, among young farmers mainly, including for accessing technical content about production practices. So WhatsApp is the major communication channel from extensionists to farmers and for farmer-to-farmer interaction, with a significant use of audio messages. The rural extension model developed by Solidaridad incorporates the use of digital tools to increase efficiency of field activities, and the cornerstone of this approach is Extension Solution, which is a mobile app to help extension staff in their daily activities. And the use of this app has enabled us to increase the number of farmers with support and the quality of data, but we identified a huge opportunity to go beyond this conventional top-down approach of agricultural extension and use digital innovation to increase farmer agency. So how have we been working to do this? So next slide, please. So the key word for our approach is co-creation. So from its inception, this digital tools project was conceived with direct involvement from farmers. We did not come up with prepackaged solutions to be adapted. We really crafted solutions collaboratively with farmer and extension staff, and this has been crucial to create ownership and adoption. So the first step of the process consisted in an intensive round of workshop with a total of 90 people, including 70 farmers of diverse profiles. And first, we invited them to share their vision of the challenges hindering the dissemination and adoption of agroecological practices. And a significant number of the challenges they raised was really centered around the accessibility of locally tailored information. Basically, farmers say that they feel overwhelmed by information that isn't relevant to their reality. And they also express the need to identify with the originator of the information to really trust the content. They also say that they are very keen to learn from local success stories using digital tools and also to share their own experiences, which was a fantastic opportunity for us. In terms of content, farmers want to understand why they should change their practices, how other farmers have done it, and what are the concrete benefits of doing so. And in the second part of our workshops, we ideate practical solutions to overcome these challenges together with farmers. And these insights shape the requirements for new digital innovations developed by our development team. So we decided to prioritize this overarching challenge of access to locally relevant information. And we defined a value proposition centered on facilitating information flows among farmers, between farmers and technical staff for co-creation of practices with collective mechanisms to validate the information. So I will now show you the results. So next slide, please. So we developed two integrated digital innovations. On one side, with enhanced extension solution with new features to increase the focus on agroecological practices and to encourage a two-way interaction between extensionists and farmers. And on the other side, we developed a new interface for farmers that we call Solis. So farmers can access Solis via a link that they receive on WhatsApp. And then they can access their individual work plan and individual guidance provided by their extension officer. They can update the state of those tasks, can upload evidences and request validation from the extensionist. So that's the basic part of it. But the most innovative part of Solis is the development of a community-driven repository where producers and extension staff can create and share their own videos and access audiovisual information on locally relevant practices shared by peers and by local experts. Can go next. So Solis is not intended to be just another social network for farmers. Our vision is really the one of a social technology harnessing the power of digital tools to facilitate the creation of a digital learning community aimed at scaling agroecological practices. So Solis combines three levels of communication flows: expert to farmer, farmer to expert, and farmer to farmer, for the co-creation of practices. And it enables direct communication between those actors on a large scale and without the limitations of physical distance. So, for instance, Solis makes it possible to replicate and enhance the experience of the demonstrative units, which are really essential in the process of convincing producers to adopt new practices. But when you are in the field, in the conventional approach, a producer might visit a demo unit 1 or 2 times to see what was done and how it is progressing, but that's all. With Solis, farmers can almost in real time follow the results of the experimentation, ask questions and clarify doubts with the farmer who is hosting this demonstrative unit. So through digitalization, we make this experience more interactive and we create the conditions for much broader dissemination and also encourage interactions and cooperation online, but also offline. And the final aspect about Solis, which is crucial, is the integration of mechanism for content curation, classification, and validation by the community. Next slide. So just before closing, a few words about the potential of Solis based on the results so far. So after 2 rounds of testing with farmers, the beta version was launched in December last year. So young farmers and women who we have identified as early adopters have been very enthusiastic about the tool, and their fast adoption indicates that Solis has a strong potential to enhance and scale exchanges of information. However, it is also very clear that sustaining this process requires in-person engagement and support activities in the field. So Solis is not intended to replace face-to-face interactions. It is a catalyst of new exchanges and a multiplier of community-driven knowledge at scale, but it is not a standalone solution. And this is why our deployment strategy includes several engagement and capacity building activities, such as the training of a small group of farmers and extension staff to act as ambassadors of agroecology and digitalization. And next slide, that will be my last one. Regarding the next steps, so now that we have launched the beta version, the actual work of implementation is starting this year. So in 2024, our efforts will be focused on dissemination and capacity building activities to scale the use of the tool and monitor uptake, and also on engagement with local stakeholders, including government bodies, farm organizations, private sector actors, to share lessons learned and encourage adoption of digital tools to scale agroecological practices. That's all for me. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Violaine. Wonderful, so inspirational. It's nice to see how the principle of co-creation of agroecology can nicely be applied to the development of digital tools, and how that in turn can enhance extension service provision and parallel horizontal sharing of knowledge to accelerate agroecological transitions. Great stuff. Wonderful. To not be eating too much into the beautiful engagement time that we'll have later in the panel and Q&A session, I would like to pass right over to Sébastien Balmis of the French company CIFOR-ICRAF. Please, over to you, Sébastien.
Thank you very much. Please let me share my screen. I don't see where I should do it. And I'm sorry, I don't see how to share my screen again.
There's a button at the bottom of the bar with a green arrow. Can you see it?
No.
Okay, I can share that.
Yeah, okay. Sorry for that.
No problem.
Yeah.
Good.
So, good afternoon, everybody. Not sure I'm on the presentation mode. Yeah. So sorry for the slight delay. I'm Sébastien Balmis. I'm in charge of cocoa sector in CIFOR-ICRAF. In a few words, CIFOR-ICRAF is a French company which is specialized in organic and fair trade chocolates and cocoa products since 30 years. And we are the leader in the organic specialized markets in France, and export to several European countries and Japan and some other countries in the world. We are pleased to present today as a private sector the incentive for the implementation of the tools. We are working in Peru with the project to implement a traceability tool, which will allow us both to have a digital traceability of all the cocoa purchase from farms to the export, and at the same time to collect some agroecological metrics. And this will be implemented by the COP, with whom we are working since 2015. We have been setting up cocoa programs in Peru. We, of course, to design this tool, we have chosen a co-design approach together with the COP, and currently there is a consultant of CIAT, which is in the field to actually finalize the design of the tool. So the participants in this project is CIFOR-ICRAF, as I said, as a French chocolate company. Our partner in Peru, which is called Colpa de Loros, in the Amazonian region of Ucayali. It gathers around 484 producers, farmers. and Trusty, which is quite a young and promising company, Italian company, which has developed a software which is able to, at the same time, digitize the traceability, as I said, and also to collect information in the field. For us, it was very important to integrate the agroecological indicators in the questionnaire that is managed by the COP in the framework of their internal control system. As I told you, we are working as organic products, organic cocoa, and to guarantee the implementation of organic rules. You know that every cooperative has to have an internal control system, so it's basically technicians that are visiting all the fields every year and collecting information on the plots, all the plots. And it was important for us to integrate actually the agroecological indicator into this more broader into this broader questionnaire, so that it would be actually completely integrated in the normal functioning of the COP. Of course, we have our approach was based on robustness, sorry for my English, and reliability, instead of trying to be completely exhaustive. And so we have chosen some key metrics, not too much, because we have discussed with the consultants and of course the COP that we could not overload the work of the technicians when they go to collect data. Data collection has actually a cost. So we have selected some metrics, multi-dimensional, so on environmental, agronomic, economic, and social aspects. We have tried to choose easy and straightforward metrics to be measured and validated. And as I said, it was a participatory selection that has involved very much the COP. They gave us the feedback. They said, no, this one we don't want. It's too difficult to collect the information. It will not be reliable because the farmer, there are some stakes, you know, when, for example, when you talk about land tenure, you have to be careful about how you really want to ask the question if you want to have a reliable information. Yeah, and of course, these metrics also, we choose them for us to be easy to communicate later on to the final consumer. So I just present some indicators, some metrics. For example, on biodiversity, the tree biodiversity in the cocoa plots, as Violaine said, a lot of cocoa in South America is conducted under agroforestry arrangements. So we want to actually capture what are the biodiversity of trees. Also, we will we try to report on biodiversity in terms of birds, butterfly, and fauna. Of course, there is a need to train the farmers on that because it's not easy to recognize all the different species. So this is something that we can complement with another project that we have together with the farmer. Of course, the presence and size of conservation areas in the farm. We are involved in another project with together with CIAT to sign conservation agreements in our cocoa programs in Ecuador and Peru. So it's important that the metrics capture also these conservation agreements, and of course the risk of deforestation. I wrote in parallel with monitoring tools that we are implementing also in Ecuador and Peru to actually be sure to monitor adequately the deforestation. On soil health, there is a number of metrics that will be collected in the framework of our project, but in the framework of this, together with the farmer, we decided to collect the percentage of soils that are covered by cover crops. We try to, yeah. On the economic indicators, income from cocoa production, this will be allowed by the fact that the traceability system will also capture all the purchase of cocoa from the COPs. And also we will try to get information on the income from other sources, being, for example, trees, fruits, and so on, coming from the plots. Diversification of products in the farm and the stability of incomes along the years, of course. And if possible, we will try to capture some information on savings and debts. But once again, the reliability of this data has to be really confirmed with it's now under current discussion with the farmer. We want to also capture some information on land tenure, the type of land tenure, the governance of the COP, the participation of farmers in the governance mechanisms at COP's level. And also we are working together with Trusty to develop a module that will help us to also cover all the capacity building done by the COPs and our program to farmers. Yes, as I said, it's as CAOCA, we are very much aware that working in organic and fair trade now is becoming not sufficient. And because we, of course, can guarantee better price to farmers. But if we actually want them to really enter in conservation measures and regeneration of their natural resources, we have to find some mechanisms to actually provide incentives for positive externalities. And we are working on that. And we believe that this project will help us actually to measure these positive externalities, which is the basis to actually find some mechanisms to pay for these externalities. So now we are in the phase of implementation of data collection using some tablets that have been handed over to all the technicians. This agroecological practices, as I said, will be entered into a blockchain platform, and we want it to lead to average scores for each metrics calculated at farm, product, and COP level. And of course, data will be used by CAOCA, not only, but also by CAOCA, that will be able to communicate on all these metrics through websites, social networks, press, and so on. So thank you very much. I think the organizer to give me the floor and open to further discussion and questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sébastien. Thanks once again, Violaine and Dave as well, for these really insightful presentations. Now I would like to pass the floor over to our scientific coordinator of the Agroecology Transformative Partnership Platform, Sandhya Kumar, to pose a couple of questions for panel discussion. Over to you, Sandhya.
Thanks, Matthias. Thank you to the many participants of this session, and I also want to give a big round of thanks to all the speakers for very inspiring presentations on the work that is underway. Just briefly, we'll have a quick 3-round of questions to all the panelists, and then we'll open it up to the many questions that have already been put in the Q&A box. Let me just encourage once again everyone who is watching and participating that they can still put their questions in the Q&A chat box. So perhaps we can start with Dave, who gave us insights on the work that is underway for developing a database for metrics and a metrics library. And of course, a lot of this work is intended to help with agroecological transitions and help measure those transitions and agroecological performance. I guess though what I was wondering is, would you say that the metrics project, Dave, and the database that is being developed by Stats4SD is only relevant for those who are focusing on agroecology, or would this be open to other users or use cases?
The short answer is I hope it's not just relevant to stakeholders using agroecology. our goal with the review and building the database is collating as many different ways of measuring performance as possible. And in my biased view, I hope that it is useful and engaging for people not doing agroecology, because then maybe they can start to identify other metrics that they can use, ways of taking a more holistic approach and maybe subtly shifting the way, or not so subtly shifting the view towards agroecology.
Great. Thanks, Dave. Perhaps I'll move on to our next speaker, Violaine. So Violaine, a lot of the focus of the work of your organization is on inclusiveness, and you spoke a lot about sort of the diverse profiles of the farmers you're working with, the various kind of socioeconomic constraints as well. So I was curious, what have you found in this work to be the main challenges in engaging farmers in the transition towards agroecological practices with digital tools, especially since you highlighted in your presentation that people want to know the why. So what have been the challenges and how have you dealt with them?
Yeah, thank you, Sanjay, for this great question. I would say, the first challenge is really kind of cultural challenge, because the producer with whom we work have always operated within a conventional production approach. So introducing agroecological practices, particularly in a country where the views on the agricultural model are highly political and polarized, this really represents a paradigm shift, in the farmer's relationship with the land and soil. So producers will only embrace new practices or switch to new inputs after witnessing tangible results. And it's very difficult to speak to a farmer about something that is not visible to the naked eye, like such as soil organic matter. So what we try is to really demonstrate visible indicators of soil quality, for instance. But, in the end, what will convince the farmer will always be yields and production costs. So that is why we work with demonstrative units, because it allows farmers to observe the impact of organic fertilization, for instance, in the real world. And then we use digital tools to support this. But this is really a challenge, and it takes time, because it's around building trust and then help farmer change their vision of their own activity. And the second challenge, which is more directly related to the use of digital tools, is this kind of contradiction between agroecology, which per essence requires very context-specific solution, and the need and urgency to systematize and scale. So what we are trying to do with Solis is not to disseminate a specific technology, because practices that work in Pará may not work in other states, in Mato Grosso, for instance, in the case of Brazil, but we structure the process to enable the co-creation of locally relevant solutions. And there is a strong potential, but again, as I mentioned, digital technology will complement, but it will not replace human interactions that are so central in agroecology. So it's also the limitations of what we do.
Great. Thanks, Violaine. And perhaps now for Sebastian. So you described, how a lot of the metrics you're using, they're meant to be robust, they're meant to be quite accessible, not exhaustive. I was also interested in knowing how you found that the digital traceability tools, including these metrics, how have you found that they're incentivizing the scaling of agroecological practices in the cocoa value chain?
Yes, thank you, Sandhya. So first reason is the first thing is, as I said, we are now trying to set up some conservation agreements together with the farmers. So which means that basically have a plan of their farm, set up together with them some objectives of conservation of some forest areas and so on, and also, of course, having some agroecological measures for soil conservation, for agroforestry promotion in the cultivated parts. And of course, there is a need to have some incentives to pay for the positive externalities of this kind of production, on top of what we already pay for organic and fair trade. And as I said, it's important to measure to be able to measure. I give you a very short example. We did a CO2 assessment of our value chain in Peru, but we were missing the data on what were the percentage of the total of area that was under agroforestry arrangements. So this is a concrete example where this kind of tool, this kind of project that we are conducting together will be of real interest for us and for farmers in the future. Very quickly also to tell you that when we speak about agroecology, when we speak about agroforestry, it's also, as Violaine rightly said just now, it's also sometimes difficult to convince farmers about the positive effects of implementing such practices, and having at the same time information on agroecological practices implemented in the field and productivity, productions, purchase, sales of cocoa will help us to actually measure the positive impact of having this kind of agroecological measure, not only 1 year, but for several years, and see the trend and be able to actually show to farmers that these practices have a positive impact on their income. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Maybe I will loop back to Dave now for a second round of questions to all the speakers. So Dave, you concluded your presentation talking about what you kind of hope for beyond this project. And obviously, I think everyone who is part of this project does hope that it has kind of long-standing or a continuation of all the outputs that can be scaled up, for beyond the scope of the current project. So I guess, how do you envision a metrics database and all the knowledge products and engagements that the metrics project is working on more broadly? How do you envision that will translate into scaling up of agroecology and agroecological practices?
This is the real question, isn't it? It's such a difficult question to answer, because I think scaling up means different things in different contexts. I'm an engineer, so when I think scaling up, my first thought is, okay, more users, more computation power, more servers, more money. That's not how agroecology will scale, in my opinion. Agroecology is, to scale it, you change mindsets. It's a change of perspective, and it's not a change of perspective that happens all at once. It's a way of spreading ideas through lots of different systems. And it's also not okay, we're going to change one big agricultural system into agroecology all at once. Agroecology happens at small scale, and I think the way our tools are going to help that change is by individuals or small projects learning about different ways of measuring performance, understanding that if they can see their system in a slightly different way, maybe they can realize, it's not all about yield, or it's not all about maximizing the 2 or 3 things that they have always tried to maximize. And I think that will be a shift. So it's lots of little changes that work up to a big change of scaling up agroecology. And yeah, I think that's how our knowledge products will help.
Great. Thanks, Dave. Moving on to Violaine. Again, talking about sort of the outputs and the solutions that you had presented, the digital solutions. It was interesting because it seems like it is, as Matthias said, it's sort of, there's a horizontal kind of flow and contribution both from producers and, as you mentioned, extension agents, and sort of the generation of content, that this is a repository. But then I guess that also raises the question of, how do you maintain quality control for agroecological outcomes? And what happens if there is some sort of disagreement between, say, farmers and extension agents about a practice and whether it's agroecological or appropriate? So how do you resolve that?
Yeah, well, that's a crucial question, and I may not be able to provide 100% answer because we are still in the beta version and still fine-tuning our model. But indeed, quality is crucial because it's the technical validity of the content that will determine the credibility of the tool and its capacity to effectively help farmers transition to agroecology. So, I think that what really makes a difference in the perspective of agroecology is to test the practices in the local context and observe in practical terms what works and results in increased yields and soil quality. So for sure, disagreements between farmers and extension agents may happen, but the way we are working with farmers is really evidence-based. So, in the end is what will bring everyone to an agreement are the results in practice. And if it results in better quality of soil and then increased yields and therefore better profitability. So of course, producers, they tend to prioritize economic indicators and soil quality is much more difficult to quantify and link to farm performance. So that's why our extension staff, they also try to raise awareness about soil organic matter, help farmers start to identify what are the signs, just observation of the landscape to identify what are these factors that also influence production quality. And then going back, to the digital tools. So there is also the challenge of scale. And I really loved what Dave just said. And I think it's the perfect summary for our event. And when it comes to expanding access to hundreds of thousands of users, we need to develop cost-efficient mechanisms for curation and classification of content because this cannot be managed manually. So we are exploring how to incorporate machine learning and artificial intelligence technologies into our tool based on experience used by big platforms such as YouTube and Instagram for content management. But, we're still very cautious about this. We have to explore. So for now, it's very much based on these agreements and these interactions between farmers and local experts. The critical aspect for sure.
Great. Thanks, Violin. And maybe a last sort of unique question for Sebastian. So again, the private sector has a major role to play in this third project under the Transitions Program. And this is a great example of how such a partnership with a producers association can actually be implemented and carried out. So I guess based on your experience, how or why do you think that this partnership has been able to create an incentive model for scaling agroecological practices and other sustainable practices?
Well, I think that we have seen both farmers and CIFOR, we have seen agroecological practices as maybe the only way to solve many of the problems that we're facing farmers. Because since 2015, I've been traveling to Peru every 3 months, and every 3 months I've heard the same problems from farmers, which is basically the loss of soil fertility, and also climate change. They are facing actually this kind of questions, and for us as a private sector, of course, even though we are in a business, we are the way we are working as CIFOR is a long-term partnership with farmers. I haven't talked about too much about CIFOR, but we are working with more than 20 years to 25 years with the same farmers. So we actually need them to have a sustainability of their production. So for us, agroecological measures, like soil fertility management, cover crops, agroforestry are concrete solutions, not only for this year or next year, but for the next 20 years, for them to be implemented. And they actually we're asking for this kind of support. So the work we are doing is simply try to respond to a common objective. And I think this is a key factor of success. When you have a common objective, you try to find a better solution.
Great. Given that there are so many questions that have already been posed in the Q&A chat box, perhaps we can just proceed to those. And I'll start with a question that has been posed by Dick Tinsley. And I think this would be to you, Sebastian. What are the overhead costs for fair trade? How much of the additional value for fair trade cocoa is consumed by the additional overhead cost? Is fair trade sustainable without external assistance?
Well, thank you very much for these very good questions. Yes, of course, I think fair trade is sustainable without external assistance. We are working, for example, in several countries. I give you the example of course, Peru is the most recent project, and this is where maybe most of the assistance is focused. But in Sao Tome, our COP is has been sustainable and self-sustained for the last 10 years at least. So yes, fair trade can be sustainable. The overhead costs, I don't want to enter into too much detail, but there are some rules of minimum price to be paid by the company with purchasing organic and fair trade, which is basically some premiums of $300 per ton plus $240 for the fair trade premium, which has to be used for social and environmental projects. But we are paying on top of that some additional premium for quality also. And well, it will be very long to explain you a little our business model and how we work. But what I can tell you is that what we are trying to do as soon as possible when we set up a program is that this program has to be sustainable and not be dependent on external finances. And this is the case for all our projects virtually.
Okay, great. We actually have a participant, Brangnu Maju, who has had their hand up. Can they be unmuted if they'd like to ask their question?
I think they have to unmute themselves.
Yeah.
They have the option to speak now.
Brangnu, are you there? Okay. They have not been able to unmute themselves. So I see another hand up, Suleiman, if you'd like to unmute.
Hello.
Hello.
I have just one question for Sebastian about the Peru project, Cacao. I don't know if I pronounce the name of the project. He has done the multi-criteria analysis, but I expect you have livestock integration to the cow production, and I didn't see the in biodiversity livestock and also use of manure to improve soil health and so on. How about so that integration? It is there is no agro-pastoral system there or not?
Okay, thank you very much, Suleiman. Yes, my microphone is on. In the region where we are working, livestock has extensive livestock is actually very present. So, and the COP has built together with we have co-founded it as CAOCA, a big composting unit which is producing about 1,000 tons of compost per year, which is handed over to farmers to maintain their fertility of their soil. So maybe I didn't present it in the matrix, but in the system we will have a module that will help us to register all the supports given by the COP to farmers in terms of distribution of shadow trees and of course distribution of compost is one of them. So we will be able actually to measure the quantity of compost produced with the manure of the livestock that will be handed over to farmers. I don't know if this answer to your question, but yeah, maybe I didn't want to present all the complexity of the system that we are now developing, but yes, this will be taken into consideration in the system.
Thank you very
Thanks.
much.
Thank you. Perhaps a question for Violaine. Again, part of this may have been answered already. There were two questions, actually. One was, again, we realize you're still in sort of a trial mode with these digital platforms, but how do experts get involved in the platform, and would they, in the long run, get paid for providing their advice? This was one question.
Yeah, well, we are indeed fine-tuning our model. So the idea is to have Solis will be open after, maybe next year we will be able to launch a public version. For now, we are really testing with the farmers with support and with our own extension staff. But the idea is then to make it open, so to also enable experts who want to contribute to share their own materials and their own videos. Before that, we will have to fine-tune our curation mechanism. When it comes to paying for advice, for now, this is not part of the business model that we envisage, because the idea is really also, to really focus on encouraging farmers to share their own practices. So, and we do think that this is the most challenging part, to really sustain farmers' engagement over time and encourage them to produce content and to share their knowledge. And at the same time, there is really a lot of content available, highly relevant on agroecological practices. So what we want is to really adapt this in a format which is accessible for farmers. So, things may change in the future because we are learning on a daily basis. But for now, our focus is really on encouraging participation from farmers.
Great. And maybe a quick follow-up, because again, you mentioned in your presentation sort of that education was a challenge. Many of them had not cleared maybe primary education, but at the same time, there is a high level of penetration of internet and sort of digital access. So there was one question about, have you experienced any issues or obstacles because of lower levels of education for the uptake, or has that not been a major issue?
Yeah, now that's a super interesting question, because, when we started our digital endeavors 10 years ago in the Amazon, the situation was completely different. Basically, there was no WhatsApp, and literacy level was really a strong barrier. But things have changed so fast, and we just observed how farmers with low literacy level use WhatsApp. So basically, they just use audio messages and icons, etc. And it's really impressive to see how this has changed the way they share knowledge, etc. So what we did was really to base the user experience of Solis on this specific user experience of WhatsApp and TikTok as well, because the young farmers really use TikTok a lot. And we realized that actually low literacy is not a barrier for uptake of digital tools, provided you base your experience on what they know, and also provided you have some in-field support activities, So again, that's what I mentioned. Sometimes we have the impression that digital tools are the panacea for agriculture. It's not the case. I have been working with digital innovation for 12 years, but really it's not the standalone solution. You need an infrastructure to help farmers use digital tools and in a meaningful way.
Great. Thanks, Violaine. Maybe Dave, since you've had a bit of a break. So one or two questions for you. The first is, have you been able to develop context-specific multifunctional metrics that consider diverse values?
Good. It's a good question. Two answers. Firstly, when we're mostly focused at the moment on bringing together existing metrics and sets of metrics, and then presenting them and enabling people who actually know the contexts in which they're working to really get the concise sets of metrics that will enable them to do their work to measure what matters. That said, we're tagging the metrics with what dimensions do they cover, what scales are they useful at, what geographical areas have they been used successfully in, and when and how are these different metrics relevant. And so I believe that question is sort of the holy grail of a lot of development, of a lot of projects, aiming to find a small number of metrics that cover all of the dimensions of interest and are context specific. And so really, I think yes is the answer, not to the developing of those metrics, but to the curating and presenting of these sets of metrics and allowing the user to filter to actually find those ones that are relevant.
Right. I understand that the question was asked by Donald, who has his hand up. Donald, do you want to say something?
Yeah, good evening all. I wanted to ask Dev another question about the metrics. Yeah, does the metrics capture the social and qualitative aspect of agroecology? Like such as, let's say, the farmer's well-being, if the community is empowered, or knowledge sharing based on farmers. Does it capture that?
Yes, very much yes. That is one of the key aspects of agroecology. And it's also one of the key dimensions that has come up time and time again in our review. So there are lots of metrics available for measuring that. Of course, the challenge is often in interpreting those measurements and understanding then how to encourage change. But that is always a challenge.
Maybe a question for all the panelists that I think is applicable, since you work with diverse stakeholders. And I also encourage the PIs, if they'd also like to give their thoughts on this. There was a question raised about a participant has written that they like the concept of co-creating knowledge, but how can we sustain the engagement of farmers? And I would posit any stakeholder to collect data in the long term. So would anyone, Dave, Violaine, Sebastian, any of the PIs?
Well, if I should start, sorry, Violaine and Dave. No, just what I was trying, maybe I wasn't very clear in my presentation, but what I was trying to say is that it was important for us to integrate metrics data collection into the current internal control system of the COP, because we are, let's say, the COP is obliged as an organic operator to go to collect data every year to all farmers, to all plots. And this is why we have selected some key metrics to be integrated in the questionnaire of internal control system, which will actually completely guarantee that the technical team of the COP will continue to collect this data. Even so, the additional costs, maybe let's say that the additional cost of collecting these metrics will be largely compensated by the fact that the system that has been implemented will really make data collection more efficient for technicians. So actually they will save time, which is a good thing. Also, it was like a trade-off. We say, okay, we will help you to save a lot of time in data collection and be more efficient in reporting, but at the same time we will integrate some other data. And actually they completely agree. As also they understood that it will be a decision-making tool for them to have this information. Thank you.
I see Matthias's hand up. Matthias?
Yeah, I really like this question, and it goes through my head a lot. So I really appreciate that you put it on, Sandhya. Thanks a lot for that. You know, maybe part of the answer is in the question itself, starting with co-creation. I think the more we do proper co-creation that is non-extractive but empowering, the higher the chances are that the different stakeholders, whether they're farmers or other stakeholders, will want to continue this process because they own it. It's theirs. It's not a researcher's or a policymaker's or a business's tool. It's their tool, right? But this notwithstanding, I think it's very difficult if the data are not fully meaningful to the people involved. And I think this is a crucial part in our work on metrics, but also in the private sector incentives and investments and the digital tools project, to find ways of co-creating knowledge that ends up informative and useful for stakeholders on a long term. I think that's the only way to make it sustainable. If it's only sustainable for a project or for research or anything of that sort, it will never be sustainable.
Right.
Jolene?
Thanks, Violin.
Yeah, I can only support what Sebastian and Matthias just said, you know, and I think it's all around the value proposition. So what is the value that farmer will receive in exchange for their data? And, you know, we all know that collecting data in the first mile is very expensive, and there is this plethora of tools that do not deliver one single value for the farmers. So if they are harvesters of data, they need to be compensated for it. And, you know, it's not only around financial compensation, it is around value. So when farmers share data, what is the kind of advice that they will receive based on this data? What are the incentives and other benefits? So, you know, it's the key element is the basic view around value proposition. And the other aspect, which I think was mentioned in the chat, is really to make sure that farmers remain in control of their data. And this is absolutely critical when we talk around digital ecosystem and interoperability between systems. We need to ensure, and that's, I think, is a joint responsibility. We need to make sure that farmers really keep the ownership of their data and can decide with which actors they want to share their data.
Thanks, Violin. Dave, last word.
I don't have that much more to add. I think Sebastian, Matthias, Violin said it very well. The goal is what happens when the project goes away? What are the farmers left with? And if we have that in mind, then I think we can help.
Right. Okay, with that, I must bring this Q&A session to a close. I thank all the participants for fantastic questions. And of course, thanks to all the panelists for wonderful presentations and for really inspiring work. And with that, I invite Marion Michaud of the European Commission to provide her remarks on the perspectives from the donor. Thanks.
Thank you. I will put on my presentations. So my name is Marion Michaud. I work as a policy analyst for the DG International Partnerships of the European Commission at the thematic unit on sustainable agriculture and food systems. Thank you very much for the previous speakers for their very insightful presentations. Now I will be a little bit broader about what we support at F3. There is consensus on the need and urgency of a paradigm shift in the way we produce, trade and consume the food we eat. We've heard about it long enough today. There is much less agreement on the way to achieve the systemic changes that are needed to transform agri-food systems to achieve the SDGs and to address the global challenges that we face. At INPA F3, we are among the services of the European Commission who strongly believe that in the potential of agroecology to support such a transformation. So in front of you, you have in a nutshell, the vision of agroecology that we support. It is very much in line with what I've been said today, and it is at the core of the Transitions Programme. It is, of course, at the center of all what we do to support agroecology under our research and innovation portfolio. I will tell you a little bit about the different initiatives that we are supporting currently. First of all, you may be familiar with the Desira initiative. It is articulated around 3 pillars. The first one is about supporting research and innovation projects in agri-food systems in the global south. 1/3 of all the projects, meaning about 30 projects directly support agroecology. DESIRA also aims at strengthening research capacities and research governance in Africa and globally. And we also support knowledge and evidence production to feed into policy design and monitoring. We also have a DESIRA Plus program, which is currently about to start in Western Africa, and which will be the follow-up on the DESIRA initiative. It will have the same objectives, but a very strong regional dimension and a strong encourage into regional economic communities and regional organizations to support innovations at scale through policy dialogue and conducive policy making. Research will be mobilized, but not in the lead. We are also supporting regional multi-actor research networks on agroecology in Africa. They are also starting. It's all about generating scientific knowledge and innovation for agroecology through transformative quality research within strong partnerships between European and African university and agricultural research organizations. We support the CGIAR through a contribution of 140 million euros. So we are targeting specific research initiatives that are close to our areas of interest. We're also aiming at strengthening research capacities and research governing. This is very important for us. And by being part of the CG's governance structure, we also aim at contributing to the priority setting towards increased alignment with our own priorities. We also support development programs which are implemented by international organizations or NGOs, and which are meant to support increased capacities of small-scale farmers and other actors to adopt agroecological practices through better access to knowledge, support services, improve technologies, market outlets, finance, and all around integrated issues of integrated soil health management. So a few key messages. In view of decades of underinvestment into agroecology, there is a need for lots of research around it to bring about compelling evidence and to gather data about its potential and modalities. We at INPA F3 need those data and this compelling evidence to make the case for agroecology and to bring it forward within the European Commission at large and within our delegations in particular in partner countries. We see a growing interest in agroecology all around through a growing number of interventions, a diversification of the implementation modalities from project support to budget support, and a net increase in resource mobilization, but it's of course not enough. Our commitment to agroecology is part of a political vision of the European Commission, which is reflected in the European Green Deal and the Farm to Fork strategy, among others. Our engagement with the Global South is part of continental, regional, and national policies through research and project support, as I've just mentioned. And critical for us now, the developments that we support in the Global South are also important for what could or what should also inform changes in the Global North. And we will increasingly connect our support to the Global South agenda in a logic of shared interest. Thank you for your attention. I'm really feeling unwell, and it must have been a pain to listen to me, but thank you.
Thank you very much, Marion, and thanks so much for finding the time despite the cold, and I hope you get better soon. Thanks so much for your remarks. With this, from my side, a big thank you to everyone. I would like to pass it over to Linny Wallenberg to wrap up today's event and give us an outlook to the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Matthias, and thank you to all of the speakers today. I really personally enjoyed the presentations and also the various questions. And it's my job now to do a wrap-up, which will involve a synthesis, a few comments on the future of the projects, and then 3 provocative recommendations. So let's begin. You've heard today presentations from 3 different projects, which we really haven't discussed much. So I just want to let you know that the 3 projects you've heard from are the first one that Dave Mills spoke about on holistic metrics, with the goal being to both assess agroecology and guide outcome-based policy and investment. You heard from Violaine about a broader digital tools project that provides technical support in terms of advisories, but also performance assessment. And then finally, you heard from Sebastian about an incentives and investment project for agroecology, which is focusing on how can we shift these incentives away from conventional practices to agroecology. And in terms of synthesis, I wanted to say that we've heard, I think, from everybody, from Vivian, Filippi onward, the urgency to scale, but doing so with locally relevant, user-focused solutions. And we have 3 levers, referring back also to Vivian's comment about what are the levers for achieving this large scale. So we have on the one hand, our metrics to help us guide change. We have our digital tools, which are powerful ways of sharing information. And we have our incentives and investment, which are as Marion said, a key driver of change, understanding markets and value and the value chain. And from this, I think the overarching theme that we heard is we need tools that work for them. I think those were the words of Dave. How can we use co-creation and co-design that is valued by farmers and other stakeholders, that is meaningful and useful so that it will be sustained? How can we involve user agency and perspectives, whether that's through use cases of metrics in the library, or whether it's farmer-driven content and accessibility, or whether it's the end consumer in a cocoa value chain. From all of this, I think the integration across these 3 areas is that we see flows of information matter. And it's interesting to me that all of these projects are really focusing on tools to enable information flows and learning and that mindset that will allow the change in behavior at the system level. And Violaine reminded us that ultimately we need to curate this information. Everybody spoke at some level of curation, and we need to learn from experience, and we need to bring the evidence that will guide us to the kinds of outcomes that we want. So let me now turn to the kind of summary of where we're going with all of this. So as you heard, the metrics project has now concluded their very extensive review and developed this meta framework. In this year, they'll continue testing and further refining the framework in a series of case studies, and also doing financial analyses to ensure their sustainability. And as was mentioned, an initial version of the database is being finalized and will soon be made public. For the Inclusive Digital Tools Project, we have 2 sites, one in Vietnam and Brazil. You heard from Brazil. The Vietnam project is developing a performance benchmark system for implementing a national policy for rice systems. And in both cases, in both Brazil and Vietnam, the teams will be testing their tools and scaling them up this year. So Solidaridad will be working with ICRAF to test Solis with their 1,000 farmers, and then scaling up through engagement and multi-stakeholder fora in Pará and Mato Grosso. And then in Vietnam, IRRI and MARD, the Ministry of Agricultural and Rural Development, will test a tool called Farm More in all 12 provinces of the Mekong Delta. And the tool will also be integrated into Vietnam's 1 million hectare program. So we're talking about really achieving huge scale with some of these tools. And finally, in the private sector incentives and investments project, we have a beautiful review of 3 different value chains, cocoa, wheat, and rice in Vietnam, Peru, and Ethiopia. You heard from Sebastian about the work in Peru today. Looking, and these, the overall project is looking at incentives related to regulations, market incentives, and non-market incentives, such as training and finance. And what they're finding is that depending on the value chain and the location, there is no one size fits all. that the incentives overall were able to enhance outcomes, but also enhanced external inputs, and that there's a need for incentives for social inclusion, which the existing incentives don't necessarily cover. So in 2024, as you heard from Sebastian, they will be developing blockchain traceability tools and piloting that with 500 farmers, and they'll also be engaging national stakeholders, for example, in Peru, working with more than 22 companies. And my final slide, because I know we're out of time, is just to really be provocative and say, we're starting across our 3 projects to really believe that to achieve scale, we're going to have to blend agroecology with other sustainability approaches. Second point is to recognize that these conventional ways of scaling, either through private sector investment or digital tools, can be adapted to agroecological outcomes if we consider that farmer focus and farmer agency, and also including safeguards. And lastly, the essential role of user-focused metrics, but at these larger systemic scales, not just at the farmer field. So including food systems, landscapes, and being able to integrate across agroecological systems. Thank you to all of you, especially our very dear participants. We will be sharing a recording, translations, and the presentations, as well as the context for you to follow up. Please go forward and do good work. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.